Good morning, everybody, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Jonathan Borgerson. I'm the Security Solutions Specialist here at SMP, joined by Ken Walsh, who is the Microsoft Teams expert at Varonis. Exciting topic today. I know a lot of organizations are bringing on some kind of messaging platform, whether it be Microsoft Teams or Cisco Teams, and really have been speaking to a lot of organizations about how to better secure that information. So Ken will be going over some of the ways that Varonis can help lock down and get some of the visibility within Microsoft Teams. For those of you who aren't familiar with SMP, really have four main practices, right? With expertise in delivering and pre-sales around network, data center security, and collaboration. Across those different tiers and ribbons, we have an innovation team that work on creating custom automations for the different solutions that we provide, as well as a 24/7 managed service offerings for these products and solutions. One of the things that I like to say, I'm the practice lead for the security group. That security tier really should be another ribbon across all the different stacks. As we're doing architectural diagrams or discussions, right? Security is always a top of focus for all of our engineers and architects while we're going through the process. And even though 2020 has been a hair-pulling, head beating against the wall kind of year, we're very honored and privileged to be recognized with some of the awards that you see on there on the screen today. So very humbled and appreciative of not only our work staff who's polled us and rated us to be one of the top workplaces in the industry, but also being recognized by some of our peers around the cybersecurity firms and so on and so forth. So again, thank you very much. I will now hand it over to Ken, and he can start to go into how Varonis is solving some of the data problems around Microsoft Teams. Thank you very much.
All right, let's get this screen shared out. Good morning, everybody. As you said, my name is Ken Walsh, and I am the Microsoft 365 specialist, or SME, here with Varonis. I focus with customers on the eastern side of the United States. I've been with Varonis for about 4 years now. I've got a lot of experience in Office 365, and it says they're based out of the Philadelphia area. There we go. There we go. It wasn't advancing for me. At Varonis, we provide a true data security platform. And so what that means, being able to focus on data regardless of if it's in the cloud or if it's on-prem and all. But at Varonis, we're a lot more than just a security platform. We also back that platform up with a solid methodology for data protection, compliance, and threat detection. All of our customers, they have the benefits of having a dedicated account team that they'll work with. We have free access to our incident response and forensics team on the security side for when there are security incidents that come up. And then also we have really an incredible support and professional services team that helps with any of the issues that could come up, as well as delivering professional services, whether it's rolling out solutions or just helping out with getting the most out of the platform. And then on top of that, an instructor-led training that is also free to help you rev up and understand how to leverage the platform. But you're never on your own to kind of figure this out for yourself. You always have your account teams, your different options for helping you to get the most out of the platform, so that you can take the data and data privacy and compliance and all from point A to point B to reach those goals. As it says on the screen there, we have over 7,000 customers worldwide. We're traded on the NASDAQ today. And again, it's a true unified data security platform. And again, I'm not advancing. 1 second. So with Varonis, and we have a partnership in place with Microsoft. And the idea with that partnership is to really provide a complementary solution, right? That's not a competing solution, but a complementary solution, so that we can have clear visibility into the data, so that we can protect it and we can understand all the different challenges and blind spots and complexity that comes with things like Microsoft Teams, Office 365, right? So we can manage that information with a solid process for things like data security. Now, Office 365, I mentioned I've been working with that for over 13 years now. I've seen it grow and kind of change from what it originally was when it first started in DPoS, and today Office 365. The adoption rate has been incredible over the years, but nothing like we've seen this year. It's very common, or I say it's not common at all anymore to talk to an organization that's not leveraging something in Office 365. I would say about a year or so ago, it was pretty hit or miss, but today it seems like everybody's using Office 365. And when we look at things like Microsoft Teams, you can look at the chart there. A year ago, July, there was 13 million daily active users utilizing Microsoft Teams. And then here we are, we're starting September. I don't have the September number, but you can see from April, 75 million active users. So you saw amazing growth. I think Microsoft did a pretty amazing job in handling that growth. We saw a little bit of disruptions, but for the most part, it was pretty well done. And why we see that amazing growth is because of the fact that Office 365 provides that seamless integration across all the products, right? And when we think about the way that we're working today, we're working from home, and collaboration and sharing, communication, things like that are really, really critical to getting our jobs done today. The thing is, when we shift and we move to things like Office 365, right, we're expanding our data footprint. Well, we have concerns. And data protection, we need to think about insider threats. And as you can see on the screen there, they're pretty good statistics here. 90% of companies feel that they are vulnerable to inside risk, where 53% of organizations can already have confirmed in the last 12 months that they've had an insider attack. Right? And when we don't take insider threats seriously, it leads to things like data exposure, data leakage, theft, right? And as it says on the screen there, those types of things can be devastating in the form of brand reputation, in the cost of dealing with a breach. But the thing is, not all of the insider threats that we see are accidental, are malicious, right? At Varonis, I mentioned we have an incident response team. We have gone through investigations where we were triggering alerts because of massive amounts of data being downloaded, right, or being accessed and things. What we have found right after the pandemic hit is a lot of people suddenly working from home, as a matter of convenience, were downloading large file shares or large amounts of data from 365 to their home computers, just because they're sharing internet with their kids who are trying to get schoolwork done. It was a matter of convenience, right? That slow internet was holding them up. And so in that case, this is a case where the organization is losing control of the information. And, again, it wasn't intentional. It was more accidental. It was carelessness, right? Not understanding policies, or maybe it's a matter of a company not really having a data policy in the first place. But of course, we do have malicious and deliberate insiders, because unfortunately, cyber theft, it pays well. To have somebody in your organization be approached by somebody on the outside requesting data that they have access to, and a lot of times don't necessarily need that access. So you can make some quick money when you're approached to give that information up. And we've seen a number of cases where that's happened, where people have been caught and prosecuted. But unfortunately, not everybody gets caught, because a lot of times we're not monitoring for these things. We don't know these things are happening. And of course, the 40% there, employees ignoring the company's security policy, again, just to be more efficient in getting work done. Security and IT were often looked at as the roadblocks of being productive. So when we're going to secure things like Microsoft Teams and Office 365, right, we're going to try to do something about those insider threats and all. Well, first, it helps to understand what Teams is all about. And from some of you may already know this, but I think it's worth going back and taking a look at the lower level. What's going on under the hood? So starting with the fact that Teams is not a data store. When our employees, our users, when they're interacting with Microsoft Teams, there's data being scattered across Office 365. So as I mentioned, the Microsoft Teams touches or integrates with a lot of the different parts of 365. For Microsoft, this is fantastic because Teams really drives adoption of the Office 365 platforms. For our users, they don't care where the data is. It's convenient. It's a great platform for collaboration and communication. But as I said, depending on how they're working in Teams determines where data is ending up. We have chat transcripts and things that are going to go to your email. You're going to have collaboration data sitting in SharePoint. We're leveraging Azure Active Directory security groups. And maybe it's not us leveraging it, maybe it's our employees are leveraging Azure AD groups to control access to information. And also we've got chat sessions where we're uploading files. Those files are going to go to our OneDrive. At least some of those chat session files go to OneDrive. Other ones are going to go to Exchange. So again, this is just to highlight that there's a lot of places that our data is going to go. And from the security, the IT, and compliance side, we really need to understand that there's going to be data challenges around understanding where the data is going, because we need to protect this information. So here we've come up to our first poll. And Jonathan, I forget, are we having something up on the screen? There we go. Right, and I'll start the timer here. Give you 30 seconds, and then we'll review the answer. All right, that's our 30 seconds. So hopefully everybody's done filling out the answers, give you enough time. So in this case, the correct answer would be C, right? There are two default Azure AD groups that are created when a team site is set up. That is the owners and the members group. Right? There's a lot of different groups and different levels that we deal with, but by default in Azure AD, there are two groups that are configured. All right, so let's go a little bit deeper. So talking about teams and data and where this information is going, right? So it's important to understand that when we create a team site, and from the collaboration side, the data that we're uploading into those team sites for collaboration purposes, well, what happens is we create a team site. That SharePoint Online Site Collection sits behind that, right? Supports that team site to store that information. And when we create the team site, we get a standard channel. And inside that standard channel, or I should say that standard channel is really nothing more than a SharePoint Online folder, right? So as we're uploading documents into those standard channels, again, it's just a folder. What's important to know here is that the permission level that we're getting is coming from the SharePoint Online Site Collection. And of course, we're using Azure AD groups to manage the access. And so because of the fact that by default, this is all going to inherit permissions, every time we create a standard channel, and under the hood, again, creating a folder, every standard channel, the users are going to have the same level of access across all those different channels, right? So there was no permission boundary here. So to help with that, Microsoft introduced private channels, right? This is the way that we can put some boundaries in place around permissions and who's getting access to information. And one thing's for sure with Microsoft Teams is a lot of times those team sites that stick around, they often are developed or created for a specific purpose, but over time, that purpose will change. It usually does. And the type of data that we're storing in that site will often change as well. So now all of a sudden, what started off for purpose A is now purpose B, where we're storing maybe some sensitive information there. This is where private channels is really important, right? But it's also important to understand how this works. That private channel is another SharePoint Online Site Collection. So again, we're getting a new permission set here, and we can have up to 30 of these private channels to support a single team site. So when you think about it from the perspective of, how many different places our data is going, again, that's another 30 sites. Overall, Teams is 31 because we've got standard channels to account for, right? So again, a lot of places that our data is going. Also, on top of that, with our private channels, if our members are capable or have the ability to create private channels themselves, well, when they create that private channel, they become the owner of that private channel. They don't necessarily have to invite the original owner. And that creates a problem because if we go back to the Teams owner and say, let's give an account into who or what type of information, do you have sensitive content stored in those private channels, they're not going to have an answer for that because they don't have visibility into it. They can see who the owners are, they can see who the members are of that private channel in the Teams properties, but they won't be able to see the data themselves. And then, of course, as I mentioned, we also have OneDrive that we need to think about as another repository where the data is going as our users are interacting with Teams. Again, this could be thousands of sites. In a lot of organizations, it's very common that when we roll out Teams really explodes. We get a lot of team sites. Over time, it becomes more about creating private channels and less team creations. But again, it's a lot of places our data is going that we need to pay attention to. And one of the questions that I get asked a lot is, so if we're migrating data or planning to migrate data from on-prem into the cloud, where does Teams even fit in? Right? Because we have some options. We got OneDrive and we've got Teams, we've got SharePoint Online. Well, I always take the approach of, or kind of look at it from the data perspective. Who needs access to the data? What type of access do they need? I would say that years ago, we used to see a lot of organizations migrate data to OneDrive for departmental information, which was always a bad idea because it doesn't provide the collaboration experience that's needed for departmental data. It's great for that home directory replacement. So Teams, we have, Teams is a fantastic option for collaboration, for communication and all, and sharing of information. But what you need to understand is we have those limitations, such as we can only break up the permissions 30 times. We also don't have read-only access here. We've got owners and members. So natively, Teams doesn't provide read-only access. So let's say we have some documents or some information, and now all of a sudden the audience is growing. So to give that read-only access, we need to start turning to sharing, right? Which creates some additional complexities when we have to give an account into who's got access. So a lot of times when data or the audience continues to grow, it may make sense to take some of that information out and put it into something like a SharePoint communication site or a team site, or a modern team site, I should say, in SharePoint, because that's where we're going to get the owners, members, and visitor access. Now, we could leverage the SharePoint level visitor site, but again, it creates complexity when we're giving account into access and all, and understanding that access. We're going to get more into that in just a little bit, actually. So one of the challenges with 365, hopefully you're getting that point, is it's sometimes very difficult to know all the places where our data is being stored. Well, traditionally, when we had file shares on-prem, IT, we created the shares. We also managed the security groups. We also, handled all those aspects and all. And what was, it was very difficult for those users to compromise our best attempts at implementing least privilege access. And that all changed when we implemented things like Office 365, because we have things like end users who can share that information. And they have a lot of options as far as how they're going to share or what they're going to share. We have to account for all the site level sharing that really does take place. We have folders and file level sharing that's taking place. And depending upon your policy for sharing, you may be able to share data with anybody on the internet using things like anonymous guest links. You could leverage global access groups internally, or other options where we're going to be able to share externally. We have guest accounts that we can work with. So there's a lot of different options for sharing. And I would say that for a lot of organizations that are trying to figure out, do we allow external sharing? Do we not? Do we just open it up? I think it's very important to really think through your sharing policies. Who needs that sharing interaction with people outside the organization? Project managers, people on the front line. Who needs to interact with people on the outside? It's important that we allow them or give them the tools to do the job. At the same time, things like anonymous guest links. If you are afraid that, or if you want to implement things like data security practices, having things like anonymous guest links kind of works against the idea of governance. So don't recommend that, but let's give our users the tools that they need in an environment that's controlled, where we have governance. We've got tools that we can leverage to make that experience a lot more secure. Because if we don't allow our users who need to share, if we block that from them, they're going to find a way to get that information out. They're going to use things like email. Email has been traditionally the way that we have shared files. They're going to use things like email. And there's a lot of different sites out there on the internet that may not be categorized by your web proxy. So again, giving our employees the tools they need to be able to get the job done, right? Because we don't want that 40% of the people working around our policies. And also how they share, it's really super convenient for, going out to the different platforms, the websites, our Office applications have it. We can do it in Windows Explorer, share that information and all. So again, it's really, really easy for them to do it, but let's give them the tools that they need. And I love this slide because this highlights some of those challenges. So like when I'm working with customers, I'll ask them, for your team's information, if you had to give an account into who has access to your information, where would you look? Would you go to Azure AD, into the portal there? Would you go to the Teams admin portal or in the Teams properties? If you're I would say a Teams owner, you'd probably go to the properties of the Teams site and say, okay, yeah, I can see the members, the owners, the guest accounts that are in here. Only problem is looking at that specifically, that's usually a very incomplete picture of who's got access to information, because we need to look at SharePoint as well, because we've got a lot of sharing going on inside of our team sites across our SharePoint and our OneDrive environments, right? There's all the sharing taking place, and you're not going to see those in Azure AD. You're not going to see that in the team side. You've got to go to the advanced views in SharePoint. But what makes that complicated is we have to account for all the file sharing, the folder sharing, which means we're going down to all these individual levels. We can also PowerShell this. We can run PowerShell scripts to pull back all the permissions. That is complex in itself because, well, number one, if we're looking at permissions and we've got thousands of sites, how do we know where to pay attention, right? So we need a better way to understand access and where there's potential risk to our information and all. And just some of the questions when we're thinking about data security and threat detection and things, there's some really basic questions we need to be able to answer. And these are so challenging when we had the data on-prem, or the fact that a lot of us still do have the majority of our data on-prem. Well, it's still very difficult to answer in 365 today. So answering the question of who has access to resources at scale, right? Not just a couple sites, but at scale when we have hundreds and thousands of sites that we're managing, from OneDrive to Teams and everything. Also, where's the sensitive data concentrated? Now, today, Microsoft has the ability to show us, when we're using things like labeling, where is that data concentrated to a point, right? We get to the file level. We can see the files and how many sensitive files we have. The problem with that is if we're working to try to prioritize risk, we need a better view. We need to be able to see it alongside of the access, the permissions, and to have that together. We don't want to spend hours or days trying to correlate access to where sensitive data is and who can access and those kinds of things. We need to simplify that, right? Because we need to take actions to reduce that risk as we're implementing our data security policies. And a lot of us, we've got industry regulations, privacy regulations that we're trying to deal with. And privacy by design is really at the heart of the majority of them anymore. How in 365 are we supposed to implement things like privacy by design when we can't understand at scale who's got access to data? A lot of times it's difficult to know where we're supposed to pay attention, right? How do we prioritize all those different sites? And reducing things like our attack surface and understanding abnormal behavior, not just in 365, but across the board, across our organization. How do we do that, right? Well, we need a better solution, right? We need something that's going to bring that visibility across all the different areas our data lives. And at Varonis, we have, like I mentioned, the data security platform, and it's focused on all these different areas. So whether it's NAS solutions, Windows, Exchange, SharePoint, even Linux, Active Directory, along with perimeter services such as VPN, bringing those VPN logs in, as well as DNS and your web proxy, pulling all these things together. We're going to use our content classification to understand where our most critical data sets, where they live. We're going to combine that with users and groups and permissions so that we can understand the access to those locations, or really any location. One of the things that we provide is bidirectional visibility around permissions, which I could easily answer the question as who has access to a given location. Or go the other direction. I'm investigating a user. Where does that user have access across my on-prem and 365 environments together? And then, of course, tying it together with access activity. So if we're trying to understand risk, we want to look at where do we have critical data that's overexposed, but also who's accessing this information? Is anybody touching this information? A lot of us, we've got just unbelievable amounts of data that nobody's looking at. We've got a lot of sensitive data that nobody's looking at that just elevates risk, right? It's no value, but it elevates the risk because nobody's paying attention. And then also to combine AD telemetry and perimeter telemetry to tell us, all the places that our data is going and what's taking place there. And that allows us to implement policies around data protection, compliance, and threat detection all together in one platform. So how do we do it? How does Varonis handle this? Well, what we're going to do is we're going to bring all the different sites, their files and folders, our systems, bring them into view here and understand where do we have sensitive information? How much sensitive information is in a given file or in a given site? What type of information? And then combine that with a full picture of who has access to that data. So whether it's somebody that's getting access because the entire site, maybe this is an actual team site here, somebody shared the entire site with Chris from legal, right? If I'm looking back in my Azure AD portal or my Teams platform, I'm never going to see Chris. Chris is going to be completely off the radar, right? Because he's inside of a SharePoint group, not inside the Azure AD group. We also have our Azure AD group and all the different members sitting inside, right? So we can count for those who are the guest accounts, who's, internal accounts and all, those members and those owners. But also, this is really important because this is how we really overexpose our information. It's through these sharing links, right? So every time we create a sharing link, internal or external, with the exception of those anonymous guest links, right? So we create that internal link, that external link. It's going to create a security group at the time of creating that link. And whoever we share the data with gets added inside. So regardless if it's somebody's Gmail account, another corporation, or somebody inside, they're getting added in here. And what I typically see is you'll have maybe 20 or 30 on these sharing link groups on a single file or on a single folder, just overexposing the information. And again, this is not visible in Teams, it's not visible in Azure AD, it's only visible in SharePoint. The Varonis platform, we're going to bring all that together in one view. We can put reports together, send them out to the data owners. We can give them to the compliance team. Who's got access to sensitive data in a team site across the board. And we're going to simplify this. All right, time for our next poll. We'll get the question up on the screen here. So how many private channels does a single team site support? And I forgot to set the timer, and there he comes. All right, just about there. All right, time's up. So in this case, the answer is A, 30. 30 private channels are supported in a single team site. And again, that's really important if you're looking to migrate data and you have a lot of subfolders or folders inside of a share that needs to be broken down, maybe for a given departmental share. Right, so it's definitely something to think about, if you're in that scenario or need to continue to break these down. Maybe SharePoint is the better location in that case. All right, let's move into data classification, right? And this is one of those areas that it's easy to think like, all right, Microsoft has data classification, Varonis has it, so it's one of those overlapping areas. I think you're going to find that the way the classifications work is going to be a little bit different, and how maybe what we're going to utilize that classification for might be a little different as well. And in Varonis, we have a lot of built-in rules that you can leverage. Also, we have about 480 different patterns that you can mix and match in custom rules, and just a lot of flexibility with building out rules. But one thing's for sure, with classification, it's never a one-size-fits-all, right? A great example is we work with manufacturing organizations. A lot of times when we turn on something like a social security number rule or a credit card, and regardless of the classification service, they often struggle because they have part numbers and SKU numbers and all kinds of things, order numbers that match that pattern, right? That social or that credit card. Right, so it's important with the classification service that it's going to be flexible enough to meet the demands of our data, right? So we can get very specific, and that's how the Varonis platform was designed, around classification and being very flexible, very easy to utilize, so that we can build out the right rule to find the data with high accuracy. And we do that by offering a lot of different options when it comes to building out rules and modifying and tweaking those rules. Things like proximity matching, saying, okay, we're going to look for our keyword versus our matching algorithm and all. How many words? Is it before or after? We have things like the validations that we can do. We have ability to combine things like dictionaries and file properties and regular expressions, like all kinds of different things we can utilize to build out a rule. We can mix and match and say we're going to have a lot of patterns and dictionaries and things together in a rule, building out different groupings and things. Also, negative keywords. Negative keywords is pretty powerful, as well as match filtering to when we have things like we're getting false positives because of an order number. Well, we can take terms inside those files and say, if we find this as a negative keyword, let's stop scanning, let's move on, and that'll eliminate that false positive. So again, it really is important with classification that we have a platform that is going to be very flexible to fit the needs so that we can have very high accuracy. And here in the Varonis platform, where do we have a lot of that sensitive information? So how do we prioritize the data that's out there across all of our sites, across all of our file shares on-prem? How much information, how much of it is regulated is sitting in a given site? How much of it is PII or intellectual property and different things? Oops, forgot to get rid of that. Also, if you're using AIP, which hopefully you guys are looking at, AIP, we can pull those classification labels in so that we can see what's been labeled today, as well as what still needs to be labeled. So again, ingesting that, we can look at the classification results that Varonis is picking up, understand what's missing as far as labeling so that we can get those applied. And also from a risk perspective, having what we call it's our dashboard with having these key risk indicators to help us understand where there's potential risk across SharePoint, across OneDrive and all. So data that's sensitive, but it's being shared externally or shared in different ways. What is stale? What sensitive information is stale and just is potential risk with no value? Also, for things like privacy by design, you can see that some of these names like Adam and the IT admins and Leona have these little red X's next to their name. This is going to help us to drive things like privacy by design or least privilege access. Those are there because of the fact that they don't use the access that they have. So in this case, we can communicate with the data owner or the Teams owner or the SharePoint owner, whoever it is, and have that communication of who potentially needs to be removed. And of course, the audit information, pulling in the audit trail from Office 365 along with our on-prem information. So completely unifying all the audit together in one location so that we can understand the activities. Where are we seeing owner changes and teams being created? Where are we seeing that there's potential threats taking place, whether it's different countries that we're seeing activity coming from? Another poll. We'll get the question posted up here on the screen. So which of these statements is true? All right, just another few seconds here. All right, so here the correct answer is B. The value that Varonis provides is not dependent upon any specific Microsoft subscription level. So the value that you would get from Varonis, whether you're on a small business plan, E1, the F3, whatever that license is, doesn't matter. The value you're going to get from Varonis is going to be the same. And a lot of times we get the question of, well, I'm on E5, so how do you compare, or what are you guys doing differently? Well, we're doing a lot differently. And so again, we don't care if you're on E5 with the Microsoft E5 with all the bells and whistles, or if you're on the lowest platform or the lowest subscription level, the value is going to be the same from Varonis. Well, I'm going to talk about some of the attacks that we've seen. As I mentioned, we have an we have an incident response team here at Varonis, and a forensics team for that matter. And we bring them on to all sorts of customer calls. We utilize those teams to help us to tune our alerting rules and to work with our customers to understand and all. We do a lot of webinars for securing environments and all, and what kind of attacks that are out there and that we see. But For Office 365, these are the common things that our team has been working with. So Azure Active Directory brute force activity. I think this is something that just about every organization is dealing with. It's a matter of looking and understanding what activity you're seeing. It's very common that we see activity coming, or when we do things like enrichment of the IP addresses that from all these different events, we can say which country they're coming from. So we see a lot of activity coming from China. We see it from Russia, from North Korea, and all over the world. Nigeria has been a hotspot for, I'd say, the past year and a half, that we have seen a ton of activity coming from Nigeria, a lot of compromises coming from Nigeria. And on top of brute force activity, we see a lot of phishing, which can make sense. You're probably well aware. I mean, it's a problem every organization faces, right? So a lot of phishing attacks. What's common amongst, whether it's brute force, a successful brute force, or if it's phishing, is that once an attacker's in, they'll leverage things like OneDrive and SharePoint to move laterally. They'll take advantage of things like sharing. They'll create some files, drop them into that OneDrive or into that SharePoint Online site, and they'll share them inside the organization as well as outside. The goal there usually is to get either a foothold by infecting a workstation. They'll have you click something which will download malware. More commonly is going to be to expand so they can get additional credentials. And that's usually when we see stuff like that, we'll bring in our forensics team. We'll take those files. They'll run an analysis of those files to tell you exactly what they were used for, which, again, if we're responding to an incident, that's going to be pretty important. We need to understand what that impact was. So, again, utilizing the tools to expand and to infect. Bypassing conditional access policies is something we see a lot more regularly today, as well as bypassing multi-factor authentication. And to give an example, this is one we saw. It's a university on the East Coast that a faculty account was compromised. And what was interesting about this one was they were using conditional access. And it turns out their conditional access policy was not configured well. And unfortunately, they had a lot of confidence in that policy. And they said when our alert started to trigger that they were ignoring it. In fact, they ignored it for a couple of days, unfortunately. And what that led to was not just one account being compromised, but many accounts being compromised. And so the alerts that we triggered was things like logging in from a new geolocation, right? That it's abnormal. And our geo alerting is based on behaviors as well as location. So we saw unreasonable geo hopping, which Microsoft calls that unreasonable travel, access to atypical files, as well as an abnormal volume of files being shared externally. That file shared externally was all about collecting those credentials, right? Expanding using OneDrive in SharePoint. So our team got on a call with that customer in about, I think it was less than 3 hours. We understood the entire scope, every user account that interacted with those infected files, every workstation, as well as what did they access, what type of data, was any of it regulated or sensitive, right? Being a school, there's not a whole lot of regulated data, but there is sensitive information. There's a lot of student information there. And we understood exactly what was downloaded out of those OneDrive sites. And did they touch the on-prem environment? At the bottom of the screen there's a link that talks about conditional access policies for device platforms, right? It's easy to get that policy wrong, so there's definitely some best practices around utilizing that. What I would recommend is forcing a policy for the device being managed. So whether that's through Intune or something else, you definitely want to have a managed device there. Also, another one, this was a large West Coast organization, very big security operations, very big Office 365 team. Again, a lot of confidence in the conditional access that they had in place along with the MFA. And this attacker used IPv6 addresses and bypassed conditional access completely. And as we worked with the incident response and forensics team, the belief is that they used a man-in-the-middle attack using something like EvilJinx that you see on the screen here. In this case, this organization, the attacker got on, they took advantage of the account, they changed the AD password. They really didn't touch anything else on-prem, but they did access a lot of Office 365 data. And again, this was all captured. The alerts were being triggered in the Varonis platform. I would say IPv6, there's not a lot of support today for that. There's a document on the slide there that you can check out, like what can we do for that? But again, there's some best practices around conditional access policies that I think are very important. And then also the man-in-the-middle attack. Like as I mentioned, our incident response team does these webinars. One of them is how a man-in-the-middle attack works. So you can see that. We can do that. We could have our team on a call for you and walk you through this so we can have a conversation about it. So just to kind of show you how that works is when we click on one of those infected files in OneDrive or SharePoint that was shared out by an attacker, we come in here, we put in our credentials. This screen, if you look at the URL at the top, the nofish.com, the beginning of that looks right. So a lot of times we don't pay attention to that URL. And the login screen that you see here, this is being proxied. So the login screen is actually real. And so when we have things like multi-factor authentication, we're still going to get the challenge. And so in this case, we have the user is going to go ahead and use their Azure application or the Azure approval for multi-factor authentication. They go through it, and then they get to their document, right? It's not uncommon, even with single sign-on, to see login prompts, right? We get them from time to time. So this may not even go noticed. They may not report this. On the back end, what's happening is we're using a tool like EvilJinx, and this is collecting the username and password of that session. But of course, because we have MFA, we need more than that, right? Here's the username and password. And then more importantly, this is the token that's given after we go through a multi-factor authentication. So we could take that token, drop it into a plugin for Chrome, and we'll get access to Office 365, completely bypassing MFA. Use IPv6, we completely bypass the conditional access policy. So how Varonis helps in this regard is we're going to pull in all those different events, as I mentioned, from the different platforms. We're not a build your own analytics. We've already got all the stuff built for you. We're going to pull the information. We're going to pull events and things from all these different sources, and we could do it without putting agents on things like workstations and endpoints. And we're going to take in all these events, and we're going to clean them up. We're going to make them readable, normalize those events, and then also we're going to do a lot of enriching. So understanding who our users are. And so in this case, David Johnson, he's he's an executive. We understand the data is sensitive or not sensitive. The device that we're getting based on the IP address, the location, the external IP, that kind of stuff. And then we're going to take all that enrichment, all those different events, and we're going to learn, right? We're going to baseline all the different profiles to understand their behaviors so that when we see things like David, he normally works from his own device. He's usually interacting with data just like his peers and have an understanding of how his peers work. Also, what data does he have access to and that he normally accesses? So suddenly when we see something like David's accessing data from a device he doesn't normally use, from a location he doesn't usually come in from, we can trigger a meaningful alert that allows us to jump into that we can provide or begin that investigation process. We have a team on our incident response that can help investigate this information or that alert. And because we've unified the audit information, we can go through investigations, answer all the basic questions that we need to answer very, very quickly with a lot of context together in one place. And with that, we've come to the end of our presentation. So I guess maybe we can open it up for questions. And
yeah, thank you very much, Ken. Great content, great information. With the world we live in now and having users working from home, it's more important than ever to try to understand where our data is and where it's going. I hope you enjoyed the session today. We try to do it a little bit different with doing the polling questions. And just for everyone to be aware of, the person who answered correctly and the fastest is eligible for an Amazon $50 gift card. So we are going to compile the results. And if you see an email coming from us in the next day or two, that means that you were the quickest on the draw. So hope, again, everybody enjoyed the content. Feel free to reach out to myself or SMP directly to set up a session to go over Varonis and to really go over how Varonis can help lock down that O365 environment for you.